World War II was full of powerful weapons, massive armies, and battles. But some of its biggest turning points came from something much smaller. Not a tank, not a battleship, not a secret weapon. Just one decision. One mistake made by men who believed they were still in control. At first, it did not look like a mistake at all. In fact, it looked logical. Germany had conquered much of Europe with speed, confidence, and terrifying efficiency. Their armies moved fast, their enemies fell quickly, and their victories created the image of a machine that could not be stopped. To many observers, it seemed as if Germany understood modern war better than anyone else, and for a while, it looked justified. But power creates blindness. Success convinces leaders that they are smarter than they really are, stronger than they truly are, and safer than they should feel. And that is where the danger begins. Because the most destructive mistakes in history are rarely made by weak men. They are made by confident men. Men who stop respecting limits. Men who begin to believe that every gamble will work simply because the last one did. That was Germany's position as the war expanded. It hid enemies, but it also had momentum. And momentum can be deceptive. It can make a dangerous situation feel stable. It can make impossible plans feel realistic. It can make leaders believe that the next victory is already guaranteed. And when that happens, caution starts to look like weakness. Doubt starts to look like cowardice. Patience starts to feel unnecessary. Then came the decision that changed everything. Germany chose to invade the Soviet Union. On the surface, the logic seemed simple. Destroy the Soviet Union quickly, remove a massive threat in the East, seize land and resources, and force Europe into a future dominated by German power. It was presented as a bold step toward total victory. Another rapid campaign, another enemy that would collapse under pressure, another demonstration that German armies could go anywhere and crush anything in their path. And in the beginning, it almost looked that way. The invasion opened with enormous force. German units pushed deep into Soviet territory. Vast numbers of prisoners were captured. Entire positions collapsed. Soviet formations were destroyed or surrounded. To many on the German side, this seemed like proof that the gamble had been correct. The Soviet Union looked disorganized, vulnerable, and incapable of stopping the advance. Once again, confidence seemed justified. But the deeper Germany moved, the more dangerous that confidence became. Distance grew. Supply lines stretched. Roads turned unreliable. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts had to travel farther and farther to support units racing ahead of the system meant to sustain them. What had begun as a stunning offensive slowly became something heavier, slower, and more fragile. The land was enormous. The resistance was not finished. And the war that was supposed to end quickly refused to end at all. This is where the real mistake began to show its true shape. The invasion was not just another campaign. It was the opening of a second giant war inside a conflict already consuming Europe. Germany had not only attacked a major enemy, it had committed itself to a scale of war that demanded more men, more fuel, more equipment, more coordination, and more time than it could safely afford. And time was becoming one of its greatest enemies. The Soviet Union absorbed the shock and kept fighting. It lost ground, cities, and millions of lives. But it did not collapse. Instead, it adapted. Factories moved east. New forces were raised. Defensive lines hardened. The country bent under pressure, but it did not break. And with every passing month, Germany found itself more deeply trapped inside a campaign that was no longer fast, no longer simple, and no longer under control. Weather is often treated like a detail in war, but in reality, it can become a weapon. Mud slowed movement. Cold punished men and machines alike. Engines failed. Weapons froze. Troops suffered. Momentum began to dissolve into exhaustion, delay, and exposure. By this point, the mistake was no longer theoretical. It was visible everywhere. Germany was fighting an enemy it had failed to destroy. Across distances it had failed to respect. Under conditions it had failed to prepare for, while still carrying the weight of war in the West. The promise of quick victory had vanished. In its place stood a long war of attrition against a state with enormous land, huge manpower, and a growing ability to recover. Historical mistakes rarely announce themselves in the moment they are made. At first, they can look bold, necessary, even brilliant. Their true cost becomes clear later, when retreat is difficult, when options are fewer, and turning back becomes almost as dangerous as moving forward. Germany had made its choice, and from that moment on, the war would never be the same. If invading the Soviet Union was the mistake, what followed was the bill due. Germany had entered the East expecting destruction on a massive scale, but also expecting speed. What it got instead was a war that kept demanding more. More fuel, more ammunition, more replacements, more transport, more winter equipment, more time. And every one of those demands exposed the same reality. Germany had started something it could not finish cleanly. That mattered because war is not just about winning battles. It is about surviving the cost of winning them. German forces could still strike hard, seize territory, and launch offensives that looked terrifying on the map. But maps can be deceptive. A line pushed forward is not the same thing as control. A city taken is not the same thing as victory. Ground means little if it keeps draining men, machines, and supplies faster than the attacker can replace them. This is what began to happen in the East. Every mile gained created more distance to defend, more roads to maintain, more equipment to repair, and more exhausted soldiers to rotate if rotation was even possible. The battlefield itself became a test of endurance, and endurance favored the side with more room, more people, and more time. Germany had expected a rapid decision. Instead, it entered a contest it was less prepared to survive. While Germany was being drawn deeper into that struggle, the rest of the war did not stop. Britain was still in the fight. The air war still mattered. The Atlantic still mattered. Bombing and industry mattered more and more. And then the conflict widened further. Once the United States was fully involved, Germany was no longer just trying to defeat enemies. It was trying to survive against a coalition whose combined industrial and military power was enormous. The Eastern gamble had been dangerous. In this larger context, it became catastrophic. This is why the invasion of the Soviet Union stands out as more than a failed offensive. It was a strategic decision that broke the balance Germany needed in order to win it all. It forced Germany into a prolonged war against an enemy that could retreat, absorb punishment, and rebuild. It tied down manpower, armor, fuel, and transport. And the more it failed to end, the more it weakened Germany everywhere else. There's a deeper human side to this mistake. Leaders imagine war as movement on maps, arrows across borders, calculations of strength and timing. But every bad decision eventually reaches the individual soldier. It reaches him in the form of hunger, fatigue, cold, fear, and the realization that the plan above him is no longer working. The German soldier in the East did not experience the invasion as an abstract error. He experienced it as endless distance, frozen equipment, poor supply, mounting casualties, and the feeling that the war ahead was only getting larger. That psychological damage mattered. Armies do not run only on steel and fuel. They run on belief. Belief that sacrifice leads somewhere. Belief that hardship has a purpose. Belief that the next push might finally end the nightmare. When those beliefs begin to weaken, everything becomes harder. Every order feels heavier. Every delay feels worse. Every new offensive feels less like victory and more like survival. By the time battles such as Stalingrad turned into symbols of disaster, the deeper truth was already clear. Germany was no longer fighting the war it wanted. It was fighting the war it had created through overreach. The same mentality that had produced bold victories had also produced a commitment too large to control. And once that commitment started collapsing, it pulled everything else with it. This is what makes certain mistakes in history so devastating. They do not simply fail. They reshape every event that comes after them. They change the pace of war, the use of resources, and the morale of armies. After invading the Soviet Union, Germany still had strength. It still had dangerous armies. But it had lost something harder to recover than territory. It had lost strategic freedom. From that point on, Germany was increasingly reacting instead of choosing. It was plugging gaps, replacing losses, and fighting on terms that grew worse with time. The initiative that had once made it look unstoppable began slipping away. And when a power built on momentum loses momentum, collapse becomes far more likely. That is why this wasn't just one bad decision among many. It was the mistake that made later disasters possible. It helped turn confidence into exhaustion, expansion into overextension, and early victory into long defeat. It did not destroy Germany in a single day. It did something more dangerous. It locked Germany into a war it could no longer control and could not afford to escape. They believed one more invasion would secure everything they had won. Instead, it helped ensure they would lose it. That is how one decision changed World War II forever.